And welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 22nd of March. So coming to the first article, Conserve Every Drop. This is a very important article. This article has been written by the Vice President himself. So indeed the article, every single word of this article is something that you can quote in your answer. So that is going to be the importance. Now coming to the context here is with regards to the International Water Day. 22nd of March is the International Water Day. And the theme this year is Nature for Water, which means that this International Water Day is going to explore nature-based solutions for water conservation. An article on this is something that we discussed yesterday also. So that article along with this article is going to be very important. Now coming to the issues which have been discussed, the first issue is with regards to the current scenario. Now in this case, what is important is the case of Cape Town is something that has been quoted. Now, Cape Town is facing a drought for the past 3 years and it is facing one of the worst forms of water crisis. For those of you who are interested in watching cricket matches, you must have seen that recently when the Indian team was present in Cape Town for a cricket match, the players were advised that they shouldn't take a shower for more than 2 minutes. So that is the level of water crisis that is existing in Cape Town. Each person is getting a water share of less than 25 liters. This is the rationing of water which is being done. And you should know, as per UN standards, approximately 40 to 50 liters of water is the right of every single citizen. So even this is something that is not being provided in Cape Town. A black market is what has arisen in Cape Town, a black market for water. But the most vulnerable are the poor, because whenever a black market is going to come, it will have exorbitant prices which only the rich can afford but the poor cannot. So this is what is the current scenario. Another thing is that a similar threat is what is looming on other cities too. So globally, there is a sentiment that the business as usual approach with regards to water is something that cannot be allowed. So that is what is the current scenario here. Now, another thing which is important here is the new agenda for water action. Now, in light of the current scenario, some global leaders have come up and they have penned down an open letter to all the other global leaders that there is a need for a new agenda for water action, which should make every drop of water count. And there is a need for a rethinking of how one understands, values and manages water, which is such a precious resource. Another thing is that these leaders have called for a policy that will allow for at least doubling the water infrastructure investment. So this is something that is going to be important, that 2 times is the increase that is required in water infrastructure investments. So that is something that is important. Another analysis which has been made is with regards to the case of India. Now, India too is faced with several water-related challenges, primarily because India is seeing a growth in its population. Also, there is lack of adequate planning in India. There is a crumbling water infrastructure in India. There is indiscriminate drilling of bore wells which is happening. So all of this is something that is resulting in several challenges. In India, there is something about a behavior of people where people have a false sense of entitlement in using water carelessly, and this is something that is causing shortages. A case of Bengaluru is something that is given in this editorial. You should also know that even in the Kaveri judgment, water has specially been allocated for Bengaluru, drinking water requirement of Bengaluru. Now, amongst 11 cities, Bengaluru is ranked second out of 11 cities, which might face the imminent threat of running out of drinking water. So this is a major challenge which India can face in the future. Some data is what is given here. Now, at present, India's water requirement is 1100 billion cubic meters of water. Now this is expected to rise to approximately 1447 billion cubic meters. So this is a huge increase. This will happen by the year 2050 and the government should be prepared for this increase. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another thing is that the Asian Development Bank has also warned that India will have a water deficit of 50% by 2030 itself. The groundwater in India is facing several challenges. You all know that the groundwater caters to approximately 60% of India's irrigation. It caters to 85% of India's rural water drinking requirement and 50% of urban water needs. But still, the groundwater is decreasing day by day and there is an urgent need for replenishing the aquifers that we have. So all of this is something that are the challenges which India is facing. Another analysis which has been made in the editorial is a geographical analysis. Now, On Earth, approximately 97% is water, and this 97% of water that the entire Earth has is something that is in the oceans, and so this water is something that cannot be used. So of the total amount of water, only 3% of water is the fresh water, and from this 3% fresh water also 68% of water is something that is found in ice caps and glaciers, and it is 30% of the fresh water which exists as groundwaters and surface water. So this is some important analysis here, that we already have geographically very less amount of fresh water, and so the crisis is even more, and conservation of this is going to be very important. So this is something important. Another thing very important which has been analyzed in this editorial is the opinion of the UN. Some data which is given by the UN itself is something that has been given, and I would suggest that you should make a note of this data. Now, approximately 2.1 billion people are lacking access to safe drinking water. So this is a huge number. Another thing is that 4 out of 10 people in the world are facing water scarcity. Approximately 3.4 lakh children under 5 years of age are dying every year from diarrheal diseases. This is also an issue for India, because India also has a challenge of non-availability of safe drinking water. Another thing is that 80% of the wastewater flows back into the ecosystem without being treated. And some data which is important here is that, as I mentioned, first and foremost, that every citizen has a right of 40 to 50 liters of water. Another thing is that the UN says that the water cost should not increase 3% of the family income. That means that a family shouldn't spend more than 3% of its income on paying for water. And another thing is that water should be accessible, and it should be within a limit of 1,000 meters from every home. So these are some figures, these are some rights which the UN gives to every single human being. These are some basic rights with regards to water. Another thing which is important here is the government schemes which are there for conservation of water in India. The first scheme that has been discussed in the editorial is the Atal Bhujal Yojana. The ABY, the Atal Bhujal Yojana. This is a scheme which is a 6,000 crore budgeted scheme. It is a World Bank aided scheme, and it ensures a community participatory model for sustained groundwater management. That is why the word Bhujal actually means groundwater, especially in areas where groundwater is overexploited and groundwater levels are stressed. This shall encompass 7 states. So this is something that you should know about the ABY scheme. Another scheme which has been discussed here is the National Rural Drinking Water Program. As per this program, 77% of rural habitations have a fully covered water status. That is approximately 40 liters per capita per day of water is what is being supplied in 77% of rural habitations. Also, 55% of rural population have an access to tap water. Also, what is being focused upon is on improving the quality of water under this particular National Rural Drinking Water Program. So these are the 2 major schemes which the government is following. Another issue is, which has been discussed by the Vice President, is the issue of leakage of pipes in urban areas. Now, this is something that is leading to a criminal waste of water, and this is something that cannot be allowed now. Almost in all urban areas, what is being seen is that the supply pipes of water are leaking, and so there is a need for an efficient piped supply system. So that is something that you can write in your answers. Another thing is with regards to the rainwater harvesting. Now, some data is very important in this regard too. At present, India receives 1170 mm of rainwater every year, but out of this much amount of rainwater, only 6% is what is harvested and the rest is going waste. So the Vice President here is giving a suggestion that it is important that this water should be harvested, and also digging of rainwater harvesting pits is something that should be made mandatory in all the buildings. So that is one suggestion. Another suggestion is with regards to reviving the ancient system. Now, this is also in line with the natural ways of conserving water. This is something that we have been discussing since past. For example, wetlands can act as a system of as an ancient system. We have had a huge amount of reverence for nature within our culture. All the rivers in India are almost worshipped. So those systems, or that traditional knowledge of the indigenous populations, is something that needs to be streamlined and that needs to be utilized. So that is something that is important here. Another idea is with regards to sustainable agriculture. We had discussed yesterday also environment friendly agriculture and sustainable agriculture, which should use micro irrigation systems like the drip and sprinkler system. This will help in the conservation of water. Finally, some suggestions is what has been given here. The suggestions are that efforts are what are required at the household, community, institution and local bodies level to supplement the efforts of the government and the NGOs in water conservation. Another thing is that sustained measures are what are required to prevent pollution of water bodies and contamination of groundwater, and to ensure proper treatment of domestic and industrial wastewater is something that is pertinent. 3 R's is something that you should know whenever you are writing an answer. 3 R's is what you should replicate. The first R is of reducing, that means water consumption should be reduced. The second R is of reuse, that means the water should be recycled and it should be reused. And the third is recycle itself. So these are the 3 R's which you should replicate in your answers. So this is what is going to be important. Indeed, water, as I had mentioned yesterday also, it is an evergreen topic for UPSC and any time it can be repeated. So the relevance is indeed immense. Now coming to the next article, read the distress signals. This again is a very important article. This is context with regards to the 200-kilometer march which has been done by the farmers in Maharashtra to highlight the issue of agricultural distress. Now this is an unprecedented march. It has been an unprecedented protest, and agricultural distress is something that is very much in news. So this editorial discusses the issue of agricultural distress, and that is what makes it important. Now coming to the issues which have been discussed, the first issue is that this protest in itself is an unprecedented protest. I had previously also discussed an editorial on that, on this particular issue, and this is again repeated. Now this protest is something that has been a silent protest. It was a disciplined protest. It was a leaderless protest. It was non-disruptive and non-violent, and it was a well-organized protest. It has received sympathy of the urban dwellers in Mumbai, and they provided the farmers with food, water, free medical services is something that were provided by doctors who volunteered. Also, this protest received a bandwagon support from all the political parties from left to right. So in that situation, this was indeed an unprecedented protest. Another thing is the result of this protest. Now, indeed, the nature of the protest itself was so calm and peaceful, and as a result of which it was a successful protest. All the demands of the farmers have been accepted. This includes pending transfers of forest land to Adivasis. Also, it includes expanding the scope of loan waivers and ensuring high prices for the produce to the farmers. So this is something that you can use as an example, that how the peaceful protest is something that led to an absolute success. So this is something that is important. Now the issue which is important here is that time and again we are seeing agricultural protest, and this is a reflection of the deep malice of agricultural distress, which is what has been discussed here. Now the first issue with regards to agricultural distress is the numerous commissions and committees that have been formed in the agriculture sector. But what is being seen is that none of these commission and committees' recommendations are being successful in doing away with this distress. Now, two reasons can be attributed to this. The first reason could be that either these recommendations that are being given are failing themselves. These recommendations are not right, and so a paradigm change is what is required in the recommendation themselves. Or the second issue could be that there is a gap in the implementation of these recommendations. So whatever is the issue, that needs to be addressed. Another thing that you should know is about the National Commission for Farmers. This was formed in the year 2004, and from 2004 to 2006, this has given 5 reports. This was chaired by Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, and this is one of the most important commissions with regards to farmers, and time and again farmers are demanding that the recommendations of this commission be replicated or they be implemented. So this is something that is very important, which you should quote whenever you are quoting about the agricultural commissions and committees. So this is something that is important. Another issue which has been discussed is with regards to the agricultural workforce. Now what has been stressed here is that there is a need to reduce the agricultural workforce. So if workforce is something that needs to be reduced, then it means that adequate amount of job creation is something that should happen outside the agriculture sector, and this is something that is not happening. So there is also a need to accelerate the industrial growth and improving the ease of doing business within the country, so that an exodus is what can happen from the agriculture sector outside. So this is one important analysis. Another pertinent issue with regards to agriculture is, and the primary cause for agricultural distress in India is the issue of agricultural marketing. Now, there is a monopoly of procurement laws within India. Maximum amount of procurement is something that is done by the government itself. Another thing is that the APMC Act is highly discriminatory against the farmer. The farmer's first sale has to be made in selected or notified mandis only, and here the middlemen are exploiting the farmers who are not getting adequate returns for the crop, and this is one major problem with regards to agricultural marketing. Another thing is that there has been little progress in India in directly linking the farmers with the buyers. As I told you, this is primarily because of the APMC Act. Also, FDI and farm to fork chain is something that is restricted. Also, contract farming till now is virtually banned in India. Formal credit is something that the farmers are not getting because they do not own land. So all of these are something that are causing immense amount of distress to the farmers, and this is something that is important. Another thing which is important and a causative factor for the distress is the risks that the farmers are facing. They have a risk of prices, they have a risk of demand, they have a risk of weather, pests and whims of policy and regulation, risk of climate change. So these are the multiple risks that farmers are facing, which is causing immense distress to the farmers. Another thing which is important is with regards to loan waivers. Now, loan waivers are something that are a political compulsion in the present times, but economically it is one of the most unsound practice. And also the same goes for MSPs. MSPs is also something that is a political compulsion, which we have seen recently also that it has been, the MSPs have been increased in the crops in the present budget. But this too is something that is economically unsound because this takes away the finances for developing long-term solutions for agriculture. So that is something that is important with regards to the agricultural distress. Now, what is important here is that the government initiatives which have been taken to do away with this issue of agricultural distress. Indeed, a number of government initiatives is what have been done. The first is the neem coated fertilizers, that the scheme of neem coating of fertilizer which the government had introduced. This has reduced the leakages of fertilizers, especially urea. Also, the government has come up with the idea of direct benefit transfer for subsidy. So this is going to cut the leakages in subsidy, and this is going to cause some savings which can be then invested for other long-term measures or agricultural infrastructure. So that is something that is important. Another scheme is the soil health card scheme, which provides appropriate matching of inputs to the soil condition, and this is going to increase productivity. Also, the tax holiday that is given to the farmer producer organization is something that is a step in the forward direction. Also, the aim of the government of doubling farmer income by 2022, at least this reflects a good intention of the government. So these are some government initiatives which have been taken. Now, some suggestions is what has been given in this editorial, and this is going to be the most important aspect. The first suggestion here is that there is a challenge. What is required in agriculture is to unshackle agriculture and make it truly a commercial market-based enterprise. This is something that has not happened. Previously also we had discussed in one of the editorials that the LPG reforms which came up in the year 1991 came up in almost all the sectors except agriculture, and this is one major problem. Another suggestion could be of creating jobs to allow exit of farmer workforce, as we have discussed. Another thing is to connect the farmers to the value chain of farm to fork. So this is something that is important. Another thing is including agri-business as a practice of farmers themselves. Also, to remove restriction on exports of farm produce and thus letting farmers tap into the international market. That means more liberalization for farmers. Also, allowing easier land transfers, including leasing, and encouraging crop diversification, which at present is something that is not happening because of the MSP. Now, example is something that is important here. For example, sugarcane. Now, sugarcane is no more a very commercially viable crop. It is not giving much returns to the farmer, but the farmers continue to grow sugarcane because it has an MSP which is attached to it. So if this flawed structures, flawed policy is something that is done away with, then farmers will be encouraged to grow crops which are more diverse and which are more remunerative. So that is something that is important here. Also, focus should be on land consolidation to reverse the fragmentation which has come in land, which has made agriculture less productive and less economical. So that is something that is important. This article is very important for General Studies Paper 3 Agriculture aspect. So that is the relevance. Now coming to the next article. Deaths in Mosul. The context here is with regards to the government's announcement of the death of 39 Indian workers who were kidnapped 4 years ago by the Islamic State in Mosul in Iraq. Now this is a statement, this is an announcement which has been made by the Minister of External Affairs in the Parliament. So some issues are what are important with regards to this. The first issue is that of a misinformation by the government. Now, what you should know here is that the government had time and again been misguiding the families, and it had been giving them information like that these workers were seen at a particular occasion, despite the fact that these workers were long dead. So this is a situation of misinformation by government, and this reflects the lack of empathy that the government has shown. Also, this is a criticism of the standard operating procedures of the government. This shows that the procedures were something that were not adequately followed, and misinformation is something that was given to the government officials in India and from them to the families. So that is something that is important. Another very important issue is the lack of sensitivity and announcement. Now the death of these people is something that the minister was aware of. So a sensitivity is something that should have been shown, and a personal information should have been given to all the families, which has not happened. The minister has made the announcement in the parliament to a question which was raised, and this is something that is the major criticism against the government. So this is something that is important. Another thing is that from this whole episode, a lesson is what has been learned, and the lesson is that there is a need for a thorough appraisal of procedure for Indian labor going abroad, so that the Indian labor should not be duped or should not remain uninformed about the risk of going to conflict areas. You should know that every year a large number of Indian laborers migrate from the country to the West Asian regions where there is a high amount of instability. So in that context, the lesson that is learned is that it is a responsibility of the government to make aware these people, because sometimes these people are illiterate, they are not much aware. So this awareness is something that the government should give to these people about the risks that exist in this region. So that is something that is important with regards to this editorial. This is something that you can also use as an example with regards to West Asia-India relation, where you can say that for India, one concern with West Asia is the safety of its workers. So that is something that is going to be the utility here. Now, based on today's discussion, please try and attempt these questions within a word limit of 150 words. And with this, we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow.